Hello, this is Joseph Wilcox doing the voice recording for Richard Unit 7 Assignment 2. This is going to be P2, so it's going to be outlining the key features of the Geneva Convention, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and European Convention of Human Rights, and the Human Rights Act 1998. So then, getting straight into it, Geneva Convention. The Geneva Conventions are a series of different treaties, basically on how to treat civilians and soldiers and prisoners of war and those who are thought to be unable to fight. So basically, the Geneva Conventions, they are just what the basic rights should be for prisoners of wartime. So the Geneva Convention will be how to look after prisoners of war, civilians caught up in war, what all their rights are. So it's basically made to protect the wounded, wounded soldiers, sick soldiers, or even wounded civilians and all that, in and around the war zone. So the Geneva Convention is made up of 4 different treaties. So the first Geneva Convention was agreed in 1864. So they agreed for the all-time protection of things like medical facilities, their personnel, and any civilians that are wounded. So basically, this is where things like the Red Cross came into power, sort of thing, because they were immune to the fighting. They were looked after by both sides, and they had their rights at all times because they were medical personnel. And this Geneva Convention actually gave the Red Cross international recognition as a medical group for both sides, so it's neutral. So then the second Geneva Convention was brought out to protect wounded soldiers at sea. This was in 1882, so if there was a war on at sea, or if a ship had been destroyed and there was a wounded soldier that they brought on board, then they would have to protect him and treat his illness if they can. Then the third Geneva Convention came out in 1929. And this was the specific protection of prisoners of war. So this came out that prisoners of war had to be looked after. They couldn't just be killed. They had to be treated correctly. And then the fourth Geneva Convention came out just after the Second World War had finished. Basically updating the requirements of the first 3 conventions. So this came out to make the Geneva Conventions that had already come out, make them actually worthwhile and not outdated, because talking about different stuff, things have moved on and different ways of being treated have actually stepped up and there's better things now. So then moving on to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So then the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was basically, it was adopted by the General Assembly of the UN in 1948. So this was adopted, and it was inspired. Why it came into use was because of the 2 World Wars. Universal Declaration of Human Rights was the first agreement that different countries had, saying that the human rights can't be taken away from a person or prisoner, that they must still be looked after, they must still have the right to food and water and all of that. So then it started off with just a simple aim, and it still has those simple aims today. Started off with an aim and basis of having freedom, justice and peace in the world. So the human rights are to be enjoyed by all people, no matter who they are, where they live, what race they are, whether they live in a powerful country or a poor country. They all have rights. So human rights came out. Human rights came out to be international, and that was where the Geneva Convention was made to be international. So then, human rights is what every human needs, basic needs to be healthy and fulfill life, sort of thing. So, if you're gonna take part in society, then they need to be met. So you can't participate in society without a right to living under a shelter, or having food and water. You can't live without those. So those have to be abided by in every country. But obviously some don't always, some can't always. But those are what they're meant to be. So human rights are for everybody in the entire world. They shouldn't be taken away from you, and they can't be taken away from you. If they are, then that's wrongfully so. And basically, if you can't protect all of the human rights, then that will lead to stuff like abuse of the system, abuse of people, not being able to enjoy life, not having fulfilled life, and that isn't right, because the basic values of human rights are fairness, respect, equality, dignity, autonomy, and other things like that. So then, these came out and was adopted by the second. Somehow, these were adopted because of the atrocities that had happened in the Second World War. In particular, the Holocaust. It was the terrible abuse that happened to the prisoners. Not only abuse, the killings, the torture, everything from the Holocaust just made everybody realise that they can't carry on like this, and something has to be set out for change. So a group of governmental leaders came together. It was chaired by Eleanor Roosevelt. They basically discussed a document so that you can't prevent human rights, so everybody does actually have their human rights. They won't be taken away from them or stopped from having. So, after starting the talks in 1945, the UN adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, and it's still obviously very important in human rights all around the world. So the UN declared human rights an international law. So then the European Convention of Human Rights. So this was started talking about in 1950 in the Council of Europe. Now, obviously, they already had the Declaration of Human Rights, but that was an international thing. And because Europe's different to many countries in Asia, Africa, and also North and South America, they decided to make some that was very specific for Europe. So then, basically, they wanted to sort out one specific for Europe as early as possible. So around 2 years after the United Nations adopted it, Europe decided to adopt it in it was talked about in 1950 and then came to force 1953. And then human rights. The Human Rights Act 1998, this is specific to UK because the whole world had one, and Europe had one which was specific to them. So the UK thought, okay, we'll make one which is exactly specific to us, so we can't be left out because it does actually cover everything in the UK. So it was talked about in 1998. reason why it's called Human Rights Act 1998. But it did come into power and was actually used from 2000. So it's basically a different, mostly the same human rights all put in together, but it's also things taken from the European Convention of Human Rights and the taken from the European Convention of Human Rights and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it was worked out for different series of sections, fitting them together in order to work out the protections of the human rights for the UK law and what would be correct and what wouldn't be. So this was very specific to the UK, which obviously meant everything had to be sorted out around the UK, allowing different laws to be brought in, and that's why it took a few years to be talked about until it actually came out, and then just basically copy and paste the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or the European Convention of Human Rights, because it was different bits were different and just slightly edited just to suit the UK more. So then, the European Convention of Human Rights, it covers the European Union. It's very specific to that, and it doesn't go off and cover parts of Asia or Africa. It's very specific to the Europe, and that is mainly why Europe has the least amount of human rights disobeyed. It's very common in Africa or different countries around the world for that to not be always followed, but in Europe it's always followed and a very big thing. So that's all due to the European Convention of Human Rights. So then, as I said, the Human Rights Act 1998 basically just added slightly the European Convention of Human Rights just into UK law. So most of it might be the same, but different parts of it will stand out to UK and different areas, because not all of Europe is anything like the UK. Thank you for listening. That has been assignment 2P2, and thanks.